I'd like to hand over to the ambassador, who is going to introduce this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. Thank you, James, for the kind words of welcome, and you've been equally delightful to work with. And I think the purpose of the event, you said it just right in your sentence, that you have never heard of Bloody Sonnets or Pavol Országh Hviezdoslav, and that is precisely why we have decided to do this event. Pavol Országh Hviezdoslav is a man of remarkable intellect, of many talents, of many layers of his personality. He is, when you say Slovak literature, Slovak writers, he is the name that immediately jumps to mind. Unfortunately, he is, to a great extent, almost unknown outside of Slovakia and outside of our country. And it is because of, the events like this, we try to change it. When I met John Minahan in my office today, we said that by events like this, we'll try to do a little bit of justice to Pavol Országh Hviezdoslav, but then John corrected me, as he has done many times. When it comes to my English, he said that we can never do justice to Pavol Országh Hviezdoslav, but we will try to talk about his work, about his life, and also about what you have embarked on, Mr. Minahan. As you know, this is the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the Slovak Republic and the 30 years of the establishment of Slovak-Irish diplomatic relations. And we, as the embassy, throughout the whole year, we will do events that will kind of highlight the Slovak-Irish story, the Slovak-Irish partnership, friendship, and all things that we do together. And you come across the connections that are not that visible, or that are not, you would not expect that in English translation of Bloody Sonnets of Pavol Országh Hviezdoslav, you would find a significant Irish figure. And that is John Minahan's, and his remarkable translation of the work of not only Pavol Országh Hviezdoslav, but also other great names of the Slovak literature and art. So John, also my deep gratitude to you and words of thank you to you, because you, in essence, you are the ambassador of the Slovak culture. You bring the Slovak culture and Slovak masterpieces of the Slovak literature to the wider audience in the world. And I'm as the ambassador, I'm deeply grateful to you. And also thank you that you have agreed to come and talk to us about Pavol Országh Hviezdoslav and his work, and also about what it meant for you to translate his work and get deep in his life and get in kind of a very intimate knowledge of the great man he was, and man of many talents, including lawyer, judge, a man who spoke several languages. But I will let you talk about Pavol Országh Hviezdoslav and him. So once again, thank you all very much for coming, and also thank you to Trinity Center for Literary and Cultural Translation. I think you were very excited from the very beginning. You come and try to present your work. And when the first sentence you hear, oh, this is interesting, we will do it, then you're very happy. So thank you very much for always making me feel welcome, and to all of you for finding the time to join us tonight, and have a wonderful literary evening. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Brilliant. So we've already just heard that John is an Irish translator who lived in Slovakia for many years, since 1996, I think. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And you have translated all sorts of Slovak poetry and fiction, and you've also written extensively on the Irish language and translated works from Irish and German. And I'm also joined here by Elena Michael. I practiced before and I failed.
You did great.
Michael Chikova.
There we go, yes.
Okay, I got it. From the Education Center for Slovak Children in Ireland. And so Elena is going to do what I could never do, which is that she's going to read one of the poems which John has selected as one of his favorites. She's going to read it in the original, and then John is going to read his translation. So, okay, let's get going. So, John, could you please start us off by introducing what these sonnets mean to you and to Slovakia as a whole?
Well, I had better not speak for Slovakia. There are other people here accredited for that. But for me, they were a revelation. I'm interested in World War I and World War I poetry. When the anniversary 2014 came around a few years ago, I was reading more, and many books were coming out. One of the books that came out was an anthology of Irish war poetry edited by Gerald Dawe. I wasn't entirely happy with it because the anti-war Irish poetry was left out of it. Gerald Dawe was rather enthusiastic about the pro-war side. But even so, he had about 150 pages of World War I poetry. And there were poets there that I'd never heard of and that were very interesting. I read a good deal of the Irish and English and some of the German war poetry, and I found some books. I found a book by Elizabeth Marsland, which treated the Irish, English, and German war poetry all together. And then I was thinking of Pavol Országh Hviezdoslav, whose Bloody Sonnets I had come across, and one or two of them I had already translated. I had done attempts at a few of them, which stood out. But as I continued reading the war literature and war poetry, I began to look again at the Bloody Sonnets, and I found that there was something quite unique there, something that didn't seem to be anywhere else. Elizabeth Marsland didn't have it in her volume. It wasn't in English, French, or German poetry. It wasn't in Irish poetry. It wasn't anywhere that I knew of. A highly ambitious attempt right at the beginning of the war in August, September 1914, to see the war, to see this event in its full scale. And I mean, at that stage, he had to imagine its full scale, but he imagined its full scale very credibly. When we read it now, he imagines what you can, well, the third sonnet, I've often said, where he refers to a demon flying overhead and shooting at the earth. It's about the air war, which hadn't got going at the time that he was writing. The air war didn't get going until 1915. And then, of course, the air war didn't really develop properly until World War II, but still, he, at the end of the third sonnet, he says, there's no safety anywhere, not on land, not on sea, not in the air. And that's the first part of it, that he considers the war as an experience of violence, a destructive experience of violence from many facets. He thinks of it as a failure of Christian culture. He thinks of it as a failure of the culture of science, enlightenment. He thinks of it as he thinks of it in terms of the families, what effects this has on families. And then he doesn't stop there. It would be easy, or relatively easy, to leave it simply at the level of anti-war protest, but he goes on to think in terms of hope. Having gone right down to the pits of despair and horror, he tries to come back up. And he works at it. I mean, he doesn't go it the easy way, but he gradually considers the possibility that there could be something better come out of this war. And at one stage, he even considers, that from the point of view of God, maybe this is a feature of evolution, that man, after all, has to go through this to evolve to better things. That's rather a dangerous thought, because that was the thought of some of the pro-war propagandists. But anyhow, he goes through that. He considers many things, including Russia, the phenomenon of Russia, which was one of the possibilities was that what happened after World War II would happen after World War I, that Russia would dominate the Central European space. And Hviezdoslav engages with Russia and Russian culture, and specifically with Pushkin in the 28th sonnet. He rounds the performance off with two sonnets, for wonderful sonnets, hymns to peace. And well, the scale of it, the scale of what he has attempted, and in my opinion, impressively succeeded at. The Bloody Sonnets are very well structured, very carefully put together. I think it's I think it's something remarkably impressive. It's also a work of music, but we'll talk about that maybe later on.
Well, that's a beautiful segue, actually, because I was going to ask you, when you translate poetry, you have all sorts of choices. So being sonnets, you could have chosen to render them in English in various different forms, and you chose the Shakespearean sonnet.
Mm-hmm.
So could you talk us through, firstly, your process of deciding what you wanted the translations to end up looking like, and also what the very basic process looked like of translating the text?
Well, I wanted everything to be clear and fluent as far as possible. And I wanted it to be somehow musical, to be a sonnet. But Hviezdoslav sonnet is quite something. First of all, there's an alternation of syllabic lines. I'll give you two lines from Macbeth, from Shakespeare, to represent 11-syllable lines and 10-syllable lines. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, 11 syllables, creeps in this petty pace from day to day, 10. So you have a kind of swing, or you have a special kind of rhythm with those two 11-syllable and 10-syllable lines. Now, Hviezdoslav sonnet is built completely on that basis. First of all, you have the short line, then two long lines, then two short lines, then two more long lines, and then one short line. And this is the octet, the first part, the 8 lines. So you have 4 long lines and 4 short lines. The 4 long lines all rhyme together. The 4 short lines all rhyme together. Then you have the sestet, the 6 lines. You have long, short, long, short, long, short. And all of those 3 long lines rhyme together. And all of the 3 short lines rhyme together. Now, maybe somebody can do that in English, but I can't. So I simplified radically. First of all, I got rid of the 10 and 11 syllable lines. No, sometimes my lines might have 11 syllables, but it will be random. The rhyming, the wonderful thing about the Shakespearean sonnet, and he knew what he was doing, you only have each rhyme once. So instead of having to find rhymes these killing rhymes that you have 3 times, you have a rhyme that just happens once and all the way through the sonnet. Otherwise, so that was my major simplification. And I think it's absolutely necessary, because I'm actually not the first person who translated the Bloody Sonnets. Another man did in Philadelphia in 1950, a man called Jaroslav Vajda, and he was quite talented, in fact, for the work but he made what I consider the fatal attempt to reproduce the Petrarchan sonnet scheme with all the rhymes, with just 4 rhymes per sonnet. And so his versions are very unnatural often. I hope mine will be a little more natural.
Well, they read naturally to me. So I'm always fascinated to hear how translators, especially when they're working with poetry, how they actually go about doing it. So some people will translate in prose first and then turn it into poetry. Other people will write several translations of the same poem as poetry, and some people will do a huge mix of different things. So could you talk us through a little bit of what your process is?
Well, it's uneven, that's for sure. But I do a prose translation, yeah, of everything. I have to try to make sure that I know all the words, and then I work at the sonnet. I try to get key lines. Sometimes I get a particular line comes to my head, and I feel I have to have that one. So that the rest of the sonnet must structure itself around that. Also, the poet has his key lines, and I try to do what I can for those. For example, the very first sonnet, he begins with blood in the positive sense. He says blood like a rose, or like beautiful blood, like a girl's blush, or the milder flush on the face of a sleeping child, or positive blood, and 13 lines of that. And then finally he says, do the butchers ever think of this? Ci mislianata kedi messiari. And that word messiari, butchers, at the end comes like a whiplash. So I thought, yeah, I should have butchers at the end. And I thought of lines like, do such things ever, do such thoughts ever happen, come, whatever, to the butchers? But get a rhyme for butchers. It's not easy. It's not easy to find something that's not ridiculous. So eventually I compromised, and the line that I have is, do such things ever cross the butcher's minds? It's the best I can do. But Hviezdoslav does better. And well, I translate poetry in bits and pieces like that, and fill the missing bits in when I can.
Okay. And did you find that you were translating in sequence, like you were doing poem 1, poem 2, poem 3, or did you gravitate to some earlier than others?
No, I gravitated, yes.
And was the one that just jumped out at you from when you decided I want to translate these sonnets, was there one in particular that you thought? There
was, yes. The one that leaped out at me was sonnet 17, the one before the one that we're to read. But that is where the mood suddenly turns after the 16 sonnets of violence and bleakness, and frequently despair, outright despair. He suddenly says, where is the leader? Where is the man who can lead us out of this? I'll just read a line or two of it. Knight of the heart, where are you? Cavalier, who can command these warring armies, halt. That is the turn. And there he dares to hope, and goes on to that's the commencement of the second part of the Bloody Sonnets.
Brilliant. And actually, So we'll read the poem, the poem 18 in just a second. But I wanted to say to you that I was really enjoying your introduction to the book. And there's one part which I find actually really prescient, of course, to what you just said, but also to the world that we happen to be living in right now. You obviously wrote this years ago, but still, you say, this then is the Slavic region, the Europe, the world that he wants to see, where none of the nations are crushed or appropriated by others, but all have their own being and develop in peaceful association with others, great and small. You could have written that just now. But without going into too much detail on what I'm seeing there, let's go into the reading. I'm going to change the slide. Okay.
Yeah.
So could I ask you, Elena, to read the original poem?
Yes. A keď sa toto peklo vyvsteká, či ozaj nastúpi zmier, pokoj neba? Nenávisť ovládzali sama seba, z nástrahy zrodili sa bezpeka. A pravda sadne za stôl od veka? Bude-li právo všetkých právom, chleba hoj všetkým? Nebude pút, zbraní treba? Česť bude práci, tvári človeka? Ten kúpeľ krvi splynie očistením, milosrdenstva znežne obrazom sebeckosť, pýcha skrotne pokorením, trojica lásky svitne príkazom, alebo beda premoženým a menom pomsty beda víťazom.
Thank you. And John, could we hear your translation?
And when this hell is cleared and drained away, will reconcilement, heaven's peace, appear? Will hatred overcome itself that day? Security be born from trap and snare? An ancient truth be seated at the table? Will there be rights for all? Bread for all? Can that be? Will we need weapons? Life be stable? Will work be honored and the face of man? And will that bath of blood become a cleaning? Mercy, can it make selfishness benign? Humility make pride less overweening? The Trinity of love by order shine? Or woe to the vanquished, and although they call it vengeance, to the victor's woe.
Thank you very much. And so in your introduction, you speak at some length about how these poems are different from so many others from the period because they have this this optimistic outlook. And was that an important factor for you when you decided that you wanted to translate the poems? Like, was that one of the things that drew you to them?
Yes, I mean that he didn't simply limit himself to pure anti-war protest, that he tried to see beyond the war, because people in wars really always do. But that particular poem, I mean, there his optimism is struggling. A lot of that poem is ironic. In fact, in the middle, it's not really ironic, but at the beginning and the end, there's a good deal of irony there. He's not able to believe it. He's not really able to. He's not really able to overcome the skepticism that the situation impresses on him. He's struggling. That poem is a real struggle. But struggle though it is, I think it has all of 20th century politics in it. Will there be bread for all? That's 20th century politics, really, in one way or another. will there be rights for all? That question goes with the question, will there be bread for all? In an uneasy harness, will we need weapons? That question is not exactly obsolete. Will work be honored? Well, there was one system which arrived in the 20th century which particularly claimed to honor work. That was Bolshevism, communism. The problem about it was the face of man. Would it honor man's dignity and freedom at the same time as honoring work? And after that, you have a series of questions about whether war can turn into its opposite, just like that, or will there be woe to the vanquished, ve victis. Now, this had its context at the time. There was an Austrian poet called Anton Wilgans who wrote a poem called Ve Victis, Latin for woe to the defeated, woe to the vanquished. And he said, the winner will crush the loser and will put his foot upon the loser's neck as if he was a hateful insect. And this is right, and this is how it has to be. And Hviezdoslav in poems 18 and 19 is responding to that and saying this is not how it has to be. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, we did in fact have a woe to the vanquished piece in 1918, 1919 with the treatment of Germany. And it did, in due course, lead to woe to the victors, as we know, because there was another round. Mm. And it's always, this question is contemporary, of course, whether there should be a woe to the vanquished peace in the present war. President Macron thinks not, or he used to think so. He thought so a few months ago. Others think differently. The problem about Hviezdoslav is that he's too contemporary, he's too modern, he's very awkward. I found him particularly awkward, I must say, a year ago, because I received the Hviezdoslav Prize, which is the main Slovak prize for translators, and I mainly got it for these Bloody Sonnets, and I received it 2 weeks after the outbreak of the war. And, well, I had to think what I was to say, because in Slovakia, as elsewhere, there's a certain division of opinion about the war, not about whether the war should have happened, whether the invasion should have happened, because overwhelmingly people would say that should not have happened. But division of opinion about whether Europe is right to pour in arms and to wage economic war, or whether Europe should try to bring about a ceasefire and to get serious negotiations and a serious consideration of the conflicting the interests and status of the conflicting nationalities. Many people were present in this room where I got the Hviezdoslav Prize, people from the Slovak literary organizations, and I was pretty sure that the balance of opinion there was that Europe was right. Europe was right in what it was doing. Europe was right in pouring in arms and waging economic warfare. I had the other opinion. So the question was what I should say. And because, as the characters in the Agatha Christie novels say, if you live long enough, you've seen it all, it's coming round again. I I told them a story about the 1970s in Dublin. I said, I distinctly remember February 1972, when there was a war between the Irish Republican Army and the British Army in Northern Ireland. The British had just shot 13 people at a demonstration in Derry. There was fury, there was absolute fury in Dublin. There were demonstrations for 3 days running at the British Embassy. And finally, on the third day, the British Embassy in Dublin was burned down. And at that time, it is a fact that the provisional IRA operated quite freely for about 2 years. The state didn't do anything or didn't want to do anything to stop them. And again, at that time, I had the opposite opinion. I had the view that the violence in Northern Ireland could not be successful, that it was necessary to have peaceful politics, and that it was necessary to have a sense of the other communities, the dissident Northern Irish communities' rights. Some people here were with me in those campaigns, and they know what the atmosphere was like then. So I told these people in Bratislava, I said, look, my opinion, the opinions that I held at that time, though extremely unpopular, they were found to be valuable later on, and the whole society moved towards them. And you could say that in the Good Friday Agreement, which brought at least some stability to this problem, that we contributed a great deal to that. So I said freedom of speech is extremely important. You should not abolish freedom of speech. It's extremely valuable, even if the other person sounds like a traitor, zradza. Their opinions may be valuable. And I told them I hoped it would not be found necessary to burn down the Russian embassy in Bratislava. The Slovaks are very civilized people, and they looked askance at me at this. But finally, I quoted Rosa Luxemburg. I said, look, Rosa Luxemburg, she was a communist, right? I don't know what you think of her or whether you have any time for her, but she said one thing that I always consider to be very, very important. That was freedom. Freedom is always freedom for the one who thinks differently. And so I said, be careful about restricting the freedom of the people who think differently. It's still in the balance, all of those things in Europe. And my opinion is still the unpopular one. But Hviezdoslav, I think, would have shared it. And, this is why he was in his own time an awkward poet, and he's an awkward poet still, and I think always will be. I was talking about this to the ambassador today, and that Hviezdoslav is awkward. Yeah, he is awkward. He is uncomfortable. He is uncomfortable for me now, and he was uncomfortable for me last year.
Brilliant, thank you. How do you follow that?
Well, I'm sorry if I've been if I've been a monopolist.
No, you've given me lots to think about. So can I ask? We often see there are many works of literature around the world which are only discovered kind of close to home for a long time, and translation is often the way that we get over that kind of problem. So somebody can appreciate the work in some form through translation. And so have you been able to observe a shift in the number of people who are able to engage with these poems thanks to the translation appearing?
I think there is some shift. People are writing more articles or citing the Bloody Sonnets in more articles. The test really will be when the next general survey of war poetry is written. The last one, I think, was by Geert Boylan's about 2015. It was called Everything to Nothing. And Hviezdoslav was not mentioned there. The test will be whether the next survey of that kind, I'm thinking of surveys like Marsland's or other more general surveys of European war poetry. The test will be whether he appears in those general surveys in the future. I hope he will.
Yeah. Well, it's through events like these that we can try and help you to raise attention to these works, which, as I said, I hadn't heard of before. So it's a fantastic education for me. And I could speak to you all evening, but there are other people here who would, I'm sure, like to ask questions as well. So we have a few minutes. Is there anybody who would like to ask John a question? Please.
How important is this poet in Slovakia? Is he has he based in Slovakian culture? What sort of a base on Slovakian culture?
He's very important. He is often spoken of as the greatest Slovak poet. It's a judgment that I would identify with. I think he is, but he's trouble. I mean, he is trouble in all kinds of ways. One of the ways that he's trouble is that he didn't follow any fashions. He was very much his own man. And I know several Slovak critics of the present time who they really resent him for that, because they feel that he should have been following fashions. He should have been a symbolist or a verist or a futurist or something, and that he has kind of cheated on the culture by not doing this. I think that's a short-sighted view. He was his own man, but he had a struggle with the language. He thought, for example, that Slovak words were too long, and he often shortened them by cutting off bits from the beginning or end, or both. And lots of people, often Slovak readers now resent that kind of thing. They think it doesn't work. He also he used a lot of dialect words, again, very often when they were shorter than the other words. For example, he has one wonderful image in the third Bloody Sonnet, which is from flax, from the flax industry. He says that the jaws of fate are gaping wide like this flax instrument. You had a base of 3 boards, and the middle one was bladed, or it had teeth, and you had a movable arm which you raised, and you put a bunch of flax stalks in, so that the heads were over the center part and the stems were behind. You brought the arm down and sliced through them, so that the usable fibers were separated from the useless stems. This, if you see an image of this thing, it is a wonderful image of fate. But the word he used for it was troina, which hardly anybody knows. The other word, which I think people would still know, is trlica. And that has 3 syllables. So he did things like that, and it causes people trouble now. However, he has many wonderful poems which are not actually that easy, that difficult to follow. Very, very lyrical poems, and poems at a very high level.
He taught in the schools.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And the most famous poetry competition bears his name.
Yes.
Hviezdoslav. So that's where the students from school would go and read poems and take that.
Would the sonnets particularly be known?
They would. They are well known. It's considered as a peak of his work.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
John, is there an overarching view from the author? Some sort of unifying theme, or is there a variety of different things?
Well, he was about Slovak, the Slovak nation, the Slovak language within Europe, within European culture and world culture. He had Indian poets in his library. He had Kalidasi, whom I haven't read yet. He had the Greeks. He read very, very widely, although he didn't follow the fashions in poetry or in philosophy in his time. He was aware of them. He was reading them and commenting on them, and he was engaging with everything in his own way. But yeah, that would be his theme. He's one of these national poets.
Thank you. Is there a question online?
There's a request online. One of our guests would like to hear another or 2, maybe more sonnets, if that's possible.
Would you be happy to read another one of the sonnets?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Maybe the one that you mentioned was the one that drew you towards them in the first place.
Yeah, The Night of the Heart.
Hey.
Knight of the Heart, where are you? Cavalier, who will command these warring armies, halt. Whether your wisdom comes of silver years, or you're a man in bloom, cry to them all, enough, and you'll be champion of the world. Offer your enemy a brother's hand, a white flag over red ruin unfurled. Or must the violence constantly be fanned till it burns out? And must one force of battle first break the other's fierce resisting will, until the pair of tilting scale pans settles, all counterweights disabled, to reveal the victor wearing glory's wings in bliss, while the defeated sinks to the abyss.
Any other questions? Please.
I want to ask, I just spoke about where these works kind of fall within the author's kind of scope of work, but I wanted to ask about your own work and where this translation falls within your own translations, kind of if you translated kind of before, perhaps, whether these pose or poetry before, whether these particular sonnets pose challenges that you hadn't encountered before, or if you work with other languages, if you found something particular about Slovak or your work with, or particularly challenging, or perhaps we became more naturally to you.
It's a good question and a hard question. I have translated from Irish. Now, in my life here in Dublin, before I went to Slovakia, I had a kind of double life. I had a life which was related to present-day issues and political issues, which was about political involvement. In the 1970s, I was in the left-wing politics of the time, and I had a translator, or as somebody who sometimes translated. I was in far in past centuries. I translated from Irish, and my translations were from the 14th century or earlier. The first translation I did was by a man who I believe is known in this center, Gabriel Rosenstock.
Yes.
Yes. Gabriel had a magazine called, a bilingual magazine called Andrahad, The Bridge. And I did some translations from Gearóid Iarla, who is, or was, a famous Norman or English Earl in Ireland, the third Earl of Desmond. He has some poems, some lyrics in Irish. I translated some of those, and afterwards I translated many more from the older Irish literature. When I went to Slovakia, it was absolutely different, because the poems that I began to engage with were 20th century stuff. And they were from people like me. I mean, the poet that I found who really served as my introduction to the literature, Ladislav Novomysky, he was in many ways like me. I mean, he almost got shot, and I haven't. But you know,
I respect that. All I was chatting is looking 59 when we came out with the two nations period about two states on this island.
Okay, threats of being shot. Okay, Tony, but no.
Serious danger.
Okay, but maybe you more than me. Anyhow, so yes, it was a shock to me. These poets were a shock to me. Novomysky, Hviezdoslav, also Milan Rufus. Milan Rufus, I translated a collection of his. He was the leading Slovak poet of the late 20th century. And he was a complicated man, basically a Christian poet. And in his last years, he became a Cassandra. He became the prophet of ruin is approaching. The collection that I translated was his Cassandra poetry, his prophetic poetry, where he thought that everything was going towards the worst. I was unhappy with that, because Rufus has also got some very beautiful poetry about music, for example, or some beautiful love poetry from his early work. But anyhow, this critic, William Marchok, selected all the heaviest stuff from Rufus's late period. I translated that. It was I'm not very happy with it, with my translation of that. I did my best with it, but I learned a lot from it. I don't know if that answers your question very well.
Thank you.
There's another question online. Someone is asking, did he serve at the front? And could he follow other anti-war voices in Austria, such as Karl Kraus?
Could I follow? And
could he follow other anti-war voices in Austria, such as Karl Kraus?
Yes, yes. In fact, somewhere here, in connection with this Woe to the Vanquished poem, I have a short poem by Karl Kraus, or I thought I had. Karl Kraus. Sorry, no, it won't do to try to quote it from memory, but Karl Kraus has a short 4-line poem where he says something like, it's time to tell everybody what this war is really all about. Those over here have achieved defeat, and these ones there have suffered victory. And that is, relates to the poem which we read here. Karl Kraus was going pretty early. He wrote something. He wrote a long essay called "In dieser großen Zeit" in December 1914, where he expressed opposition to the war to a certain degree. But and of course, after the war, his the last days of mankind, the huge drama of his, was published, but he couldn't publish that during the war. Kraus didn't. Kraus is very interesting in terms of comparison with Hviezdoslav. He didn't do anything like the Bloody Sonnets at the beginning of the war. And his Last Days of Mankind, which incidentally an Irishman translated, Patrick Healy. Some of us used to know him here in Dublin. So yeah, I have read The Last Days of Mankind. It's again, that's something else which is scarcely dated, because it's mainly newspaper reports. It's mainly things that appeared in the newspapers in his time, during the wartime.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question. Oh, thank you.
Do you know any contemporary Slovak poets, and if so, are there any you feel would be inspired by these themes?
The last part, please.
Would you know of any contemporary Slovak poets that you feel would share themes with Hviezdoslav?
There's certainly nobody on his level. I do quite often translate slim volumes for living Slovak poets. And I translated one larger book called 6 Slovak Poets, which was published by ARC publishers in England. There are interesting contemporary Slovak poets. I don't think there is anybody who is an outstanding peak.
Sorry, somebody's also wondering if Hviezdoslav served at the front himself, but I think perhaps he was a little too old. Was he in his 60s?
Oh, no, he was far too old to serve at the front. He was 65, yeah. Many of some of the Slovak poets who appeared in the 1920s had served at the front, of course. Jan Smerek, whom I like very much, and Emil Borislav Lukács, I think, may have served as for some time. Anyway, they were, Nowomeski was too young, but he was powerfully influenced by the war. You have a whole different literature in the 1920s. No, Hviezdoslav was too old. So,
the audience asked earlier was how long did it take you to translate these poems?
I had been the first poem that I gave for a kind of publication was a friend of mine who is a curator in the Slovak National Gallery, was doing a modern exhibition on blood, and he decided that he wanted one of Hviezdoslav's blood poems, and the first one, of course, the positive one. So he wanted me to do that, and I did it. And that was 2013, I think, just before the centenary. And as the centenary went on, I had done others or attempted others previously, including the one that I read here, The Night of the Heart. And gradually I began to feel I should do the whole lot. So maybe 2 years intensive work.
Well, would you please join me in thanking John and Elena?
Thank you all.
I think the ambassador would also like to say a few words.
Yes, thank you very much. It's been very educational. There are layers and information that I did not know about Pavol Országh, Hviezdoslav. And so thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Trinity Center for Cultural and Literary Translation, for doing this with us. I have little something that, you know, at the beginning I said that we are commemorating the 30 years of the Slovak-Irish diplomatic relation. And for that occasion, I asked one of the artists in Slovakia to do an art piece, a limited edition graphic, our print, that would bear a symbol of something that is recognizable here in Ireland. And that is the Trinity College. And it's the old town hall in Bratislava. So this symbolizes also, you know, 30 years of our friendship, of our partnership, which as two countries is based on deep fundamental values of freedom, democracy, right to expression, you know, the right to sovereignty and free choice of the way we live, respect for human rights, respect for international law. So these are the fundamental values which Ireland and Slovakia share and firmly believe in. This is throughout the year at some of the events. This is something that I present to people who are part of the Slovak-Irish story. We have really shaped the relations between our countries. And Mr. Minahang, as somebody who has such a deep knowledge of the Slovak culture, Slovak literature, I would like to present this limited edition print to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Also being at Trinity College, I have to, James, with the words of appreciation, present one also to you. So thank you very much.
That's extremely kind. Thank you.